I ran across directions for dehydrating eggs in an old cookbook. It was in Mrs. Rorer's new cookbook, which was published in 1902. Now, there are warnings all over the internet that you should not dehydrate your own eggs, and I do not recommend dehydrating them either. However, curiosity got the best of me, and I wanted to give this a try. I know that other people have tried dehydrating eggs and it didn't turn out well. They wouldn't rehydrate properly. And I know that the methods that are ordinarily used are to cook the eggs first and then dehydrate them. And some people will just mix the eggs up and dehydrate them. And both ways they say they don't rehydrate well. Well, this method says to separate the eggs. You need to separate the whites from the yolks before you dehydrate them. And I wanted to see if that would make a difference. So I've separated some eggs, and as you can see, I didn't do a very graceful job of it, and I decided I didn't want to dehydrate those little goobers, so I set them aside. I tell you, I really don't like the idea of dehydrating my own eggs. I would rather buy powdered eggs, spend a little extra money. It's worth the peace of mind to me not to have to worry about it. And I know that they were most likely dehydrated safely and that they will rehydrate properly. And that's what I recommend to all of you. But then I have to find out if separating the eggs is the secret to dehydrating eggs. I would think that it might make the process safer too, because from what I know about salmonella in eggs, they claim that if salmonella is in an egg, that it's most likely in the white of the egg, and as the white thins, then the salmonella can get to the nutrient-rich yolk where salmonella can rapidly grow. And it would seem to me that if you separated the eggs, it might lessen the risk of that happening. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? So I put the eggs in the dehydrator and I picked out the membrane that was around the yolk and any thick parts. I just wanted the runny egg to this. And I put the dehydrator on 135. And 20 minutes later, I checked it, and it was drying pretty fast. I thought too fast, maybe. And because you could see the white was like, it looked like plastic flying around in there. So I turned the dehydrator down to 125. I checked the eggs after they had been dehydrating for 1 hour, and the yolks were drying pretty well, so I turn them over so that the underside could dehydrate, and then I spread the whites around. They were taking a little longer. When the eggs had been in the dehydrator for 2.5 hours, I checked them again, and they were pretty much dry. So I took some of the whites out, and they crumble up. They look like sugar. The yolks were just about dry. They're a little bit greasy. They kind of reminded me of shavings of crayons. It took 3.5 hours to dehydrate these eggs, and I tried to grind the yolks up in my blender, but it didn't do a very good job. So they ended up right chunky. And when I decided to rehydrate them, the whites rehydrated rather well, but I would advise to add a lot of water to them initially, because I added a small amount and they lumped up real bad, and then it was hard to undo that once it got that way. The yolks never did rehydrate well at all, and I had messed with them for about 30 minutes. And then I decided to put them in a blender and blend them up to see if that would make them rehydrate, and that didn't help much either. So I strained the yolks, and then I strained the whites and put them in a jar, and then I scrambled the eggs. And they didn't taste bad, but it was mostly whites, and that's what it tasted like. So I would think in order to make this work, you would have to really pulverize those yolks into a fine powder. I'm not sure how that could be done, but that seems to be the problem with dehydrating the eggs. It's the yolks. The whites did great because they were whipping up. You could see the foam on them from where I was stirring them. They look like they could probably be whipped into a meringue or something. But the yolks are the problem. So all in all, the experiment wasn't a total failure. I mean, if you could pulverize those yolks better, it would probably help them rehydrate better. And if I was totally desperate, then I could do it this way, but with the amount of aggravation that's involved in everything, I still recommend buying powdered eggs. Cut corners somewhere else. Buy the powdered eggs. Here's the directions the way they were written in the cookbook. It says, eggs may also be evaporated and kept in glass bottles or jars. Separate the whites and yolks, spread a few at a time on a clean stoneware or china platter, and slowly evaporate or dry in a very cool oven. When the mixture is fine and perfectly dry, it is ready to put away. This powder is capable of taking up the same amount of water that has been evaporated from it, and may then be used the same as fresh eggs. I know it sounds counterproductive, but in hindsight, it might help if you added water to the yolks before you dehydrate them. That way you could thin them out so that it might be easier to pulverize them once they're dry. I don't know. I still think that buying powdered eggs is the way to go. So that's how my dehydrating eggs experiment turned out. Hope it helps.